Previously on The Greatest Secret.
In the Middle Ages, Avalon turned into the place where the Holy Grail was kept. In a number of versions, this sacred vessel of immortality is housed in a castle called the Four-Peak Fortress on an otherworld island which is known as Anwin.
In the Middle Ages, linked with the stories of Avalon and the Arthurian legends, appears a quest. Inspired by literature and artwork, this quest has kept a motive of interest for historians and researchers for hundreds of years. In this episode, we explore the written legends of what is considered by many to be the greatest mission of humanity, to find the Holy Grail.
The legend of the Holy Grail, more than any other Western myth, has retained the vital magic which marks it as a living legend capable of touching both imagination and spirit. No other myth is so rich in symbolism and sustained throughout the ages. At its core, there exists a secret which has kept the mystical appeal of the Grail alive for the last 900 years, while other myths and legends have slipped into oblivion and been forgotten. The various stories always describe a dreamlike journey into the unknown. By completing the journey to the Grail, the seeker is transformed, and through his actions, he restores the world into its original paradisal condition. Just as there is no single account of this quest, there is no single description of the Grail. It variously appears as a dish, a cauldron, a chalice, and a cup. It's thought that the origins of the Grail begin in ancient Celtic mythology. Old tales tell of fantastic visitations of heroes to the island realms of gods and immortals, where valorous warriors were entertained with food and drink served by golden vessels of abundance. The modern legend of the Grail first appeared at the end of the 12th century. It sprung from the author Chrétien de Troyes in his poem Perceval. It details a boy who heads to King Arthur's court, where a young girl predicts greatness for him. He sets off on an adventure and comes across the old fisher king, who invites him to stay at his castle. While there, he witnesses a procession where he is presented a beautiful grail during a feast. He spends much of the poem asking about the grail, longing to see it once again. In Parzival, a German version of the Grail story, the author Wolfram von Eschenbach describes the Grail as a stone vessel brought down from heaven. The story describes the quest as one of the individual struggling towards a sense of wholeness. The quest is not just a physical one, but a reunion of earth and heaven, of nature and the divine. He writes, "There was a thing that was called the Grail, the crown of all earthly wishes, fair fullness that ne'er shall fail." Parzival can be translated as piercing the valley. The name is signifying that the Grail can be found through a union of the dualistic aspects of ourselves, piercing the valley of extremes. The prologue opens up by informing us how there was once a paradise on earth called Logres. Throughout this land, maidens lived by sacred grottos, wells, and springs. These maidens would feed wanderers and travelers from golden bowls and cups. The realm was at peace and fertile until one day, the evil king Amagons ravished one of the maidens and stole her sacred bowl. Soon, the inhabitants of the land were following the king until there was no more maidens of the sacred well. The wells and waters dried up, animals died, and the now barren wasteland lost contact with the other world, the unseen spirit world of the Celtics. The Grail hero thus must re-establish the link between Earth and the other world, where he can revive the golden age which was lost. Parzival is allegorizing the loss of the divine feminine, the compassionate spark within each of us that was extinguished in favor of dominance and tyranny. Springs and wells were thought to be the most powerful outward expression of the life-giving abundance of the earth goddess. And this is why Britain and the lands around it have mythologies speaking of the fountain goddess, one of which is the Welsh Mabinogion, where the protagonist Owain falls in love with the Countess of the Fountain, who exists in a paradise land. Old British lore states that surviving followers of the goddess fled paradise and were displaced. From then on, they were always searching for the safe and peaceful haven in an increasingly divided and violent world. Joy, peace, and a sense of harmony with nature could now only be found in the legends of the past. This goddess figure appeared in the early legends of the Grail. In Parzival, it's written, "She was beautiful, gracious, and splendidly garbed as she entered with the Grail in her hands. There was such a beautiful light that the candles lost their brightness, just as the stars do when the moon or the sun rises." While the Grail is seen as a healing and nurturing vessel, its transformative powers often completely disrupt the established order. For instance, in the Arthurian stories, when the Grail first appears at King Arthur's table, his kingdom appears to be flourishing. But within time, the Knights of the Round Table are disbanded in favor of the Fellowship of the Grail. Although the Grail is a healing force, it will destroy as often as it will nourish. Those chosen few who pass its rigorous tests are transformed, but those who attempt to grasp its meaning before they are ready are purged and oftentimes killed. For example, the knight Lancelot and Gawain in the later legends are found to be flawed men and not worthy of the Grail's gifts. But Gawain, one of Arthur's knights, was originally the Grail hero. In the 13th century Diuchron, it's written that Gawain in his search comes to a land 'twas full of all delights that heart of man might desire. At the entrance to this wonderland was a building of glass, but the way was guarded by a flaming sword. This scene is strikingly reminiscent of the gates of Eden, guarded by God's cherubim, marking the boundaries of the otherworld. In the French story Perles Vas, the Grail hero sets sail with only a steersman for company and visits what's called the Isle of the Ageless Elders. It's written, Perles Vas looks beneath a very fair tree, which was tall and broad, and sees the fairest fountain that anyone might describe. It was set with rich golden pillars, and the very ground seemed to be of precious stone. This is the Fountain of Youth, which appears in numerous legends outside the stories of the Grail. Oftentimes, this fountain is found beneath a tree of life and knowledge, at the center of the world, the Axis Mundi. The Axis Mundi is a predominant feature of most world cosmologies. It is usually seen as the center point of the Earth, and the place where the Earth is joined to the sky, the heavens, and in the Grail myths, the otherworld. The Grail itself is a manifestation of the Axis Mundi. It is the point from which all directions are established. This also applies to time, for as all directions flow from this point, from the North Pole, so at the center all times occur simultaneously. Perhaps this is why those who drink from the Grail are said to have their youth restored. Interestingly, in some artwork, the Grail castle which Perles Vas visits is shown to be in the center of a zodiac wheel. Over time, the Grail became intertwined in the story of Jesus Christ. In Christian lore, it is the cup that Jesus drank from at the Last Supper, and that Joseph of Arimathea used to collect Jesus' blood at his crucifixion. It's interesting to note that Jesus had 12 disciples, as King Arthur had 12 knights of the Round Table. Some Christian artwork even seems to have borrowed the idea of the Round Table, replacing Arthur's knights with the 12 disciples.
For many years, we had a feeling that we lost our position in the world. Without guidance, we say that we lose our north. But the truth is that the north never left us. It was always there, like a voice in the distance, calling us to go back to that hidden paradise that was once lost to us. It's time to listen and rediscover ourselves, so that we may never lose our north again. We will follow our hearts and listen to that whisper telling us to return home.